It's not uncommon to find old computer parts at the thrift store, but usually it's stuff like low-end PCI sound cards, 20 gig IDE hard drives, PC-133 RAM sticks, and Ethernet cables. But I already have plenty of these parts, so I'm not especially interested in them. So when I saw these bags of parts on the rack, it definitely caught my eye. These are 2 bags of all or mostly 8-bit ISA PC expansion cards. And surprisingly, they're not modems. Not that I have anything against modem cards. I have one in my Tandy 1000 and I do use it occasionally to call BBSs. But I don't need any more of them than what I've already got. So I picked up these 2 bags of 8-bit ISA cards. They were both on the rack for $9.99. And I can tell you exactly when was the last time I found anything like this at the thrift store because I made a video about it. It was in March 2017. Let's take a look at what I found this time. I know these are not anti-static bags, but this is old 5-volt equipment, so it should be pretty resistant to static discharge. Looks like there's 3 cards in this bag. First card is missing its bracket, but it is a parallel card. It looks like an original IBM card too. Missing the bracket, but otherwise looks to be in okay condition. This foil is kind of bubbly, but they've been like that for decades, so I don't think that's anything necessarily wrong with it. Here's another one. This looks aftermarket. Yeah, it says CA, Computer Accessories, copyright 1984. So some reason we have both the original IBM parallel card and an aftermarket equivalent. Then here is what appears to be original IBM floppy drive controller card, again from the original PC or XT. This has the connector for the external drive, which most people never used, but it does appear to be original IBM. Interesting that the circuit board itself is quite a bit more see-through than what I'm used to. So that's the contents of the first bag. 2 parallel port cards, 1 original IBM, 1 aftermarket, and an original IBM floppy drive controller. Now on to the next bag. This one is in its own bag. This is an anti-static bag. This is a dual floppy drive controller, it looks like, because it has 2 34-pin connectors. My guess is this is a high-density floppy drive controller because the main chip has the 1989 date code, and by then high-density 3.5 and 5.25 inch drives are becoming very popular, and people who are still using older PCs and XTs wanted to upgrade their system to support those drives, so they would put in a card like this. Actually, there is the date code sticker, 0490, so this is from 1990 by this M company. I don't recognize that logo, but assuming it's some kind of company that starts with the letter M. Here's the next card in a Ziploc bag. This is not an ISA card, though. This is something much, much newer. It's a graphics card with looks like an S-Video output or input. It's an NVIDIA card, NV1017. And there's the date code, 1101, so quite a bit newer than the rest of the parts we've seen so far from 2001, but it still could be useful. Next we have some brackets with looks like a parallel port and a game port. So this would be either for an expansion card, or some systems had these ports built into the motherboard, and then you would use a bracket like this to add the ports to it. And here, finally, another old 8-bit ISA card. So this looks like it has a serial port, a clock calendar, then all these connectors. Could be parallel ports or more serial ports. IO plus 2. Another card with that M logo on it. And this is also from 1990. That looks like a game port because that matches up with that number of connectors. I guess this has one serial port built in. An optional second serial port. You can see the UART chip is not installed. The one that is installed is an 8250, which is very common UART chip for a serial port. But it looks like if this was fully equipped, it would have two serial ports, a game port, clock calendar, and maybe two parallel ports. Okay, I found some information about this card and it's really weird. First of all, it's identified as an AST card, even though this doesn't say AST anywhere on it, unless this M company, whoever they are, cloned the AST design, but it's listed as an AST Research IO Plus 2, and the 2 symbol is intentional because these two sockets here are for Apple II joysticks. Often, aftermarket joysticks would come with both kinds of connectors on them for either Apple or IBM, but this specifically supports Apple II joysticks, the old Apple II Plus kind, where it would connect to a socket on the motherboard instead of a connector on the back of the machine. And then both of these connectors are for the second serial port. They both connect to what would be COM2, except one is configured as DTE and the other is configured as DCE. That's some kind of weird technical difference that I don't really understand. I think it just determines the kind of pinout it uses. So these are both for the second serial port, but you get two different choices of configurations for that. And then this would be for the parallel port. And then obviously it has the built-in serial port and the clock calendar. And just so it's clear, this card has nothing to do with emulating Apple II software. It was designed for users who were switching from an Apple II to an IBM PC and wanted to use their existing Apple joysticks and paddles with IBM PC games. To the software, these Apple joystick ports appear identical to the IBM joystick port. So it doesn't need a special driver or anything like that. I'm sure you're wondering if this battery is still any good, so I'll pop it out and test it, and as expected it's completely dead. Here's a brand new CR2032 battery. It tests fine, so I'll put that in. To test out these cards, I'm going to put them in my original IBM PC, which I have connected to the Kidtronic Color Keys keyboard and mouse, just so it isn't so overwhelmingly beige. I do have the matching IBM 5151 monochrome monitor, but its 50 Hz refresh rate isn't as photogenic as the 60 Hz refresh rate of CGA, so I'm going to be borrowing my Tandy's CGA monitor. I normally have this massive full-length 7 Plus multifunction card installed, which provides internal floppy drive controller, external floppy drive controller, clock calendar for battery backup, and yes, I did replace that battery, 2 serial ports, and on the back is a joystick port and a parallel port. But for my first round of tests, I removed it. I replaced it with the original IBM floppy drive controller card and the original IBM parallel port card. And to test that parallel port, I have it connected to my Okidata Microline 92 9-pin dot matrix printer from 1984. When DOS boots up, we should see and hear the print head do a little dance as the parallel port initializes. But first I want to try out that floppy drive controller. Obviously it's not going to support high density floppy disks, but it should support 360K 5¼ inch disks, which I have in the A drive here, and 3½ inch 720K disks in the B drive. So let's try running this program. It's the music construction set. And there it goes. So the floppy drive controller is working, at least for the 5¼ inch drive. Now let's try that B drive with the 3½ inch 720K disc in. And we do get a directory. Let's try running this program. Copy to PC. Alright, I don't intend to copy any disks right now, so I'll just break out of that. But at least proves that the floppy drive controller is working. And to test the printer, I have a document open in Microsoft Works for DOS. This printer needs a new ribbon, but you can definitely see it did print. The day began like any other that hot summer in New York. Pat, Dave, Jason, Mike, and I were walking the streets together. The 5 of us were like that. We grew up on the same block. Heck, Pat and I lived in the same building. Now I'm going to try out this aftermarket floppy drive controller. Like I said, I can't find any manufacturer or model number on this, but I found the dip switch settings for a very similar looking card. So I set them to indicate a 360K 5¼ inch A drive and a 1.44 megabyte 3.5 inch B drive. These switches are for the 3rd and 4th drives, which I don't have installed, so that doesn't matter. This is new. Multi-driver 2. A drive is 360K, B drive is 1.44 megabyte. Just heard the printer initialize. So it looks like those dip switch settings I found online were correct for this card. So I'll put that same 360K disc in the A drive. And there it goes. So the A drive works. Now let's try out that B drive with a high density 1.44 megabyte disc. And yes, it is reading the disc. Try running the program. Do you have a color display? Yes. Has detected an Intel 8087 math core processor in your system? Yes. So this software seems to be working fine on the high density 1.44 megabyte disk. In fact, I'll do a check disk to prove that it's a high density disk. There you can see total disk space 1,457,664 bytes. And to prove that the aftermarket parallel port card works, I'll print out another text document. Of all the rock concerts ever given, there are a few legendary ones. Who can forget the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show? Jimi Hendrix live at Woodstock, or Bob Dylan at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Now to try out the IO Plus 2 card, I have it installed. And you can see a bit of a problem here. I'm out of slots. I have this expansion card. I have my RAM card, which expands it from 256K on the motherboard to the full 640K. I have my CGA video card, the floppy drive controller, and the hard drive controller. So I have no room to put this bracket, which has the printer port and the PC joystick port on it. And if I wanted to use those Apple II joysticks, where would the cables for them go? The manual for this card suggests leaving open one of the slot covers and feeding the cable through it. But what if you don't have any free slots? You don't have anywhere to put that cable. Nonetheless, I have my printer connected as well as my mouse connected to this 9-pin to 25-pin serial port adapter. First, I want to try the real-time clock. The documentation that came with the card says to use the AST clock and set clock programs, which you can download from the -0 degrees website if you need them. But first, I'm going to try this generic timer program, which I was using with the 7 Plus multifunction card, which I previously had installed in this PC. So the command to initially set the clock is timer/I. Says to enter the current time. It's 8:09 p.m., so that's 20:09. Current date, it is 3/15, and it doesn't allow a 4-digit year, so I'll just enter 22. And then when you start the computer and you want to retrieve that time and date from the real-time clock, you use the command timer/S. Timer/S. And yes, that does appear to work, because it retrieved the time and date from the card. And now if I type date and time in DOS, it shows the correct time and date. So the real-time clock in this card is working. Next, I want to try the mouse, so I'll load the Cute Mouse driver, CT Mouse. Installed it in COM1. Now I'll try this mouse test. And yes, it is moving around in all directions. This mouse does not have a center mouse button, it only has left and right, but they are registering correctly. And here's yet another test of printing, this time with the parallel port on the IO Plus 2 card. In 1975, Led Zeppelin was on top of the world. They were the richest, the biggest grossing, and the heaviest hitting rock band in the world. When they arrived in Seattle on March 21st, 1975, all forces were in place for a stellar concert. It has been said that when Zeppelin was at their worst live, they were better than most bands. When they were at their best, they wiped the floor with them. I don't have any joysticks which use the dip socket style connector, which was designed for the original Apple II and Apple II Plus. But I do have several joysticks which were designed for the newer Apple II computers, which use this style of connector. And it's actually electrically compatible, it's just a different style of connector. So with that in mind, I came up with this. I was able to make it by looking up the pinouts of those two different styles of connectors, and this handy chart telling you which ones go to where on each of them. So I stuck little pieces of wire into the socket and then connected these clip leads to them, and also to this connector, which would then plug into the joystick. So hopefully this mess of wires is going to work. So here's the setup. Apple II joystick, 9-pin connector, maze of wires, and then the IO Plus 2 card. Here's a program that tests the joysticks, and it says joystick 1 is present, joystick 2 is absent, which is correct because I don't have anything connected to that second joystick connector. And if I move the joystick around, you can see in addition to the CGA snow, the cursor does move around. I'm not getting a full range of motion across the screen, but I think that's deliberate because it kind of segregates joystick 1 on this side and joystick 2 on this side. So if I move it side to side, the cursor is moving side to side, and same thing up and down. And if I push the buttons, you can see that's button 2 and that's button 1. A little bit flaky, but I think that's just the joystick itself. So it is definitely working with the Apple II joystick and my homemade adapter. As for actually using the joystick in a game, I have the classic Tetris here, or at least the Spectrum Holobyte version of it. It asks, do you want to use a joystick? I'll say yes. And we'll see if it works. So here we go. Yes, that is moving. Let's see. How do I... Okay, the button is working. And I can drop it. I wouldn't say this game necessarily benefits from the joystick because it's perfectly playable with the arrow keys. So you're not really gaining any advantage by using the joystick, which is one reason I never really had a joystick for my PC, because all the games I played worked perfectly fine with either the keyboard or a mouse. So this IO Plus 2 card designed by AST is certainly very interesting, but I can't imagine there would have been much interest in these Apple II joystick ports, because if you were switching from an Apple II to an IBM PC, it was probably to run business software, not to run games. Because when it came to playing games, if I had the choice between an Apple II and an IBM PC with standard CGA graphics and PC speaker sound, I would have chose the Apple II. And AST had a much more appealing card on the market, which had all the same features as this card, except for the Apple II joystick ports. It had a clock calendar, it had a standard PC joystick port, a printer port, and a serial port, and it combined together with the RAM expansion together onto one card, and that was the 6-Pack Plus, and that was one of the best-selling expansion cards ever made for the IBM PC and XT class machines. So I'm very happy that all these vintage 8-bit ISA expansion cards I found in those bags at the thrift store work fine. I haven't tested this video card. Honestly, I don't have much use for it, but it's certainly nice to have as well. But as for the IBM PC, I'm definitely putting back in this 7 Plus card because it has everything I need and it works perfectly.